Okay. Hi everyone. My name is Shiva Priya Santhanam. I go by Shiva. Chris was the first person who took me to the Renaissance Festival in 2013. Yeah, 2013. I've known Chris since almost the first week since I moved to Bowling Green. That was the first week I moved to the United States from India in 2010. I was about 24, maybe 24 years old at that time, much older now. I'm married and have a little son who's 2 years and a quarter now. So I didn't know Chris was going to be here. I have pictures on my phone I can show you. Known Chris for a really long time, and I'm really happy to be here. And thanks to Danielle for inviting me. I am an assistant professor now at the Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders at Bowling Green State University. So I returned to Colorado for almost 9-ish, 10 years after I graduated from BGSU. I worked there and then returned here as my work is primarily with autistic adolescents and adults. Does any of you have relatives or family members who are on the autism spectrum? Many of you do, okay. So I'd like to take some time for you all to ask questions and share experiences and comments. So I'll keep my presentation short. I have like about 20 slides really. So I'll kind of move through that and give a lot of helpful information, but then I also want to like really hear from you. Hopefully this is not a one-time thing, and if there are future times that we can, interact and share and do like maybe even private sessions of like, having us from the university pass more information on how to support you and your family, we'll be more happy to do that. So let's get started. Now Daniel's going to be operating my slides. Here are some disclosures that I have to share every time I present. I don't enjoy sharing that. I'm a full-time employee. I'm also licensed and certified by the American Speech Language Hearing Association as a speech language therapist. I'm licensed in the states of Colorado and Ohio. I direct a program called the Interactive Neurodiversity Affirming Clinical Support Program here at the university. That's what I was invited back to BG for. So that's what I came here to do. And so I'm directing that clinic now. We have several students who are BGSU students who are on the autism spectrum, who are part of that program right now. And I also run a lab, which I didn't mention here. It's called the Communication and Neurodiversity Lab. And I have several students from our department working with me in the lab and doing research to support autistic people and families. Yeah, so I have a lot of free time. Okay, this presentation, I believe, is for anyone who has a family member on the autism spectrum or anyone who's just interested to learn about autism. I'm going to share something that you'll realize that this presentation is really for anyone. It's just not specific to people who know or have someone who's autistic in their family. My hope is to explain neurodiversity and what neurodivergence is. I hope you'll leave with that information at the end of this presentation. Also, to understand truly the strengths and challenges that neurodivergent people, including those on the autism spectrum, have or face. And then learn at least 2 or 3 inclusive strategies that we all can use in our community or in our own families with autistic children or with autistic adults. And then at least 3 ways that we can modify how we talk about autistic people or how we write about autism. The primary reason for me to do these kinds of presentations, I've been doing this a lot. We do like at least 2 or 3 a month in all kinds of different communities. This is a very unique crowd for me to speak to. So I'm really, it's like a huge honor to be here. But these kinds of presentations are helpful for me because there are lots of misconceptions and misperceptions about autism that are out there. So presentations like this are very educational to help us understand what is it that we want to learn more about autism. So those misperceptions disappear to a large extent. And I think it's also really helpful because there are increasing number of autistic people in our community. Right now, the rates are 1 in 36. So 1 in 36 children have a diagnosis of autism. And with these increasing rates, we're going to see all of these kids grow into adults and, be working amongst us, be having jobs amongst us, and they're going to be in all kinds of professions in our own communities. So just learning about them is just helpful for us and for them, right? Because then they'll have a much more higher satisfaction in their own work environments or educational environments. So that's kind of the reason as well that I do these workshops. Okay, so I'll start with this very basic concept. There are different views of disability. One view of disability is the medical model, which believes that imagine this is the autistic person or the neurodivergent person. According to the medical model, which is what most of us are familiar with, we believe that this autistic person has challenges in their world and they're disabled because they cannot do a lot of things. We say things like, oh, they cannot understand another person's perspective, they cannot communicate, they cannot socialize like other people, they have a lot of restricted interests, and so it's harder for them to engage in a regular classroom, they cannot live independently. So look at all of this, we're saying what the autistic person cannot do, right? That's our biggest focus, that's what we've been focusing on. And believe me, even in my own education, my undergraduate, my master's, my PhD, all through my education, I was taught with this model in mind. This model is currently taught in schools and colleges as well. So anyone who knows about autism thinks about autism from this model. But I'm going to tell you or ask you to shift your focus a little bit. We move to the next slide. To start thinking about autism as one that is caused by barriers in our environment. So if you start shifting the focus, start looking at autism not as a disability that's caused because of inherent challenges or challenges within the person, but because of barriers or problems in the environment that make this person go through a lot of challenges in their daily life. And I'll give you examples for each of these so you understand why autism, like many other disabilities, you talk about deafness or you talk about, anxiety disorder or, any other disability or a physical disability, a visual disability, anything that we all experience in our life to a large extent is caused because of the barriers that we establish in our society. If those barriers don't exist, chances are we will not have that impairment or that disability will not even exist. We wouldn't even feel disabled. Now, this might feel like a very foreign concept. This might feel like, how is that even possible? Of course, the autistic person is disabled, right? That's what we're all thinking for the most part. But let's start from here, communication barriers. Now, we've established that there is a certain way to socialize in our world, right? We've established that there is a certain way that we interact with other people. Now, if someone deviates from that expectation, that social norm, we say that there is a problem, right? So we're used to, for example, in a conversation, like you're all doing, I'm speaking, and you're all looking at me, you're nodding, you're smiling, you're showing that you're engaged, right? Now, this is what we're all used to. And whether we like it or not, we kind of conform with that social expectation. We agree with it and we do that all the time in all our social interactions. But imagine there was someone here who said, I don't want to look at you. I'm just going to look down. I'm going to be doodling the entire time. I'm not even going to lift up, look at you. Now, there are two ways to see this as the presenter. I can either get offended and say, okay, this person doesn't want to look at me, or I can say that they are still engaged. They may not be engaged while looking at me. They may still be engaged as they're doodling. Yes, and that's totally fine. And that's what we're trying to say, that the shift needs to happen for us to understand that autism is a difference in how, it is a difference in how someone communicates, and it's not a deficit. It is not a disorder. It is not something that the autistic person lacks, but it is a lack of understanding from people who are not autistic to understand the autistic person's way of communication. Am I making sense? So, yeah.
But what if that person actually? Then that's not a communication, right?
No, so what if that person's actually not listening to you? And, you know, after the conversation, like this happens in classes a lot, right? Like when you're teaching and there's a student who's like, you know, maybe or may not be listening. So if this is happening like multiple times, and I would often go approach that person and ask them, hey, you know, do I see that in his grades? Do I see that in all his assignments and his performances? If he's acing them all, chances are he's listening. He's just not listening in the traditional way and not communicating in the traditional way. But if he's like really flunking all his exams, he's not doing well, he's not performing well in all his assignments, then I can go approach him and ask him, hey, I know you're in class, you attend every class, but you're not really engaged, so what's going on? And at that time, that's an opportunity for me to learn more about what else I can do to make my class better for him, as opposed to asking him to step up and say, okay, you know, study hard, do better, do more. Instead, it's my role then to then see, okay, where can I meet you based on how much you are learning and what your capacity is, right? So then it gives me an opportunity to learn more about that person. That's why I see it. I think we're all so used to more, even in the university, we have trainings for faculty a lot on how we can better educate our students, because professors come from this like very rigid mindset that a student has to be a certain way and behave a certain way, talk a certain way, study a certain way. We have all these expectations, but the truth is the world is changing. It's changing much faster than we blink, you know, our eyes. There are so many different ways that students learn these days. Their attention spans are much limited. They're glued to devices. They're doing things very differently from what we all did when we went to school and we grew up, right? So when we change the ways we communicate, with one thing that we're finding out from my own research is if we change the way we communicate with autistic students in a classroom, that different communication style is actually helping all the other students who are not autistic as well. So if we change our teaching procedures to support or to align with the needs of the autistic student, my teaching gets better. Therefore, all my other students who are not autistic are also benefiting from my modified teaching. So it's actually benefiting everyone, not just the autistic person. Yes.
I don't know if this is too premature to ask this, but that is very understandable, I think, for a long term. You're going to have that person available on a long-term basis to be able to establish all those points. But what about when you're out public and meeting, and especially our age group and maybe a generation or so down, that's a lack of quote unquote lack of respect.
Yes.
Not have,
Yeah.
I have that problem even with my grandkids.
Yeah.
How would you tell if someone's engaging?
Yeah. So there are two ways. Thanks for bringing that up. That's, I think, a very good point. I think a lot of people perceive that as rudeness, and lack of respect, or not being appropriate, right, in social environments. Trust me, even speech and language therapists ask me this question. So it's a very common question that I receive. So one of the things that we say, that there needs to be effort from both parties, like the autistic person needs to make an effort, and you as the non-autistic listener or communication partner also need to make an effort, right? So the effort that the autistic person is making is that they are self-advocating. Right? You may all have heard about self-advocacy, which is a skill in speaking about yourself, or speaking about what you think is important for you, your preferences, your needs, your challenges, your strengths. So if I walk into a room and I say, so for example, I tell my students a lot before I start the semester, I tell them that my English is not going to sound like the English of someone who was born and raised in the United States. Because I speak, read, and write in 3 languages. So my English is going to be influenced by those languages. So if I have an accent, that's normal. My accent is a normal thing. It's not a problem. If you have a problem with this is what I tell my students. If you have a problem with my accent, I want you to tell me if you don't understand what I say, then I can modify and say it differently, or I can write it, or have closed captioning or something like that to aid your understanding. Now, what I did right there is self-advocacy, right? I spoke about my challenge in communicating to a group that might not understand my accent. I spoke about my strengths, and I spoke about what works for me. As your teacher or your professor, if you tell me this is what helps me, then I can modify and teach you better, or I can modify to communicate to you in a better way. So that's what I did when I'm advocating for myself. The same thing applies to an autistic person. If I tell the autistic person, whether they're speaking autistic people, because there are a lot of autistic people who don't speak, they use communication devices to communicate. So whether they're speaking or non-speaking, if I teach them in therapy, we help them learn how to advocate for themselves. We tell them, like, when you are in a social setting, like this one-off meetings that you're talking about, when we are in that social setting, I tell that person, hey, I'm autistic. I have a way of communication that might be different from you. Don't think I'm being rude or being disrespectful to you. This is language I can either program into their device, or I can help them learn and say it by themselves. When you say that, the other person automatically becomes more understanding. They're like, of course he's going to come across like that because he's autistic. Then you don't feel offended anymore. You feel like, okay, that person's autistic, so therefore they're going to speak that way, right? And then, am I making sense so far? And then I ask the other person who's non-autistic to allow more understanding that everyone communicates differently. That making ourselves more open to the fact that people are going to communicate differently based on their disability status, the generation they come from, the culture they come from, the language background they come from. People are going to communicate differently. So if we get, this is one thing I tell myself, get what I need, and whatever I went there to, and that got done, and I'm good. I don't care too much about how this was communicated to me or how it was said to me, right? Because it can be so many different reasons. And if you're meeting a person like for 2 minutes at a Walmart cashier, for example, and that person's being rude to you, it's like, you're going to spend your life with them. That's all right. And you don't have to worry too much about that 2-minute interaction. But if you are, like, say, in a gathering like this, I'm going to spend an hour with you, and I'm being rude and offensive, you have the ability to tell me to walk out, right? Or you can have the person who's in charge tell her that, to ask me to walk out. You have the ability to do that if it gets like extreme. But you also have the ability to ask the person, hey, whatever you're saying is coming across like really rude or offensive or inappropriate. Can I ask why? And chances are the family member or the person themselves will then take that opportunity to explain to you, yes, I'm autistic, or yes, I have a different communication style. I apologize, I'm sorry. And guess what? Most autistic people actually have no intention. It's all those jerks outside the non-autistic community that are usually offensive, right? All those like really mean people. The autistic people are usually not offensive at all. They have no intention to be offensive. They may come across that way, but all the time they're seeking community. They want to belong. They want friends. They want to be liked by people. They are big time people pleasers. They want to be approached and they want to be like just welcome into their environments, because every day in their lives, they're facing social isolation. Their own peers don't like them. They get bullied at school. Their teachers don't understand them. Their parents sometimes use offensive remarks on them. Nobody understands them. So autistic people are always seeking that sense of belonging. All of my autistic students right now have very young friends, like a 20-year-old will have a 5-year-old friend, or they'll have grandparents who all as friends. They don't get along so much with their own age group people because those peers don't understand them. The older people and the very young people understand them really well because there isn't a lot of like social pressure and that peer expectation, right? So autistic people, as you know, a natural tendency for them is to just be honest. So I describe their style of communication as honest communication. They'll tell you what it is on your face. They will not sugarcoat it. They will not imply. They will not say something and think something else, right? Whatever they're thinking in their mind is what's going to come out. I had a 7-year-old in the clinic the other day, and he came in and he asked me, "How old are you?" I said, "I'm 38." And he's like, "Oh, you're 38? You're as old as my mom." I said, "Yeah, I'm as old as your mom." And then he asked me, "So do your knees hurt?" I said, "No, my knees don't hurt." It's like, well, they're going to hurt in a few years. And I was like, yeah, maybe they're going to hurt. And then I asked him, "Do your knees?" And he was like, "Yeah, when I fall down, they hurt." I was like, yeah, logic, right? Yeah, logically, yes, when I fall down, my knees hurt too. And so that could be perceived as offensive. And he kept asking this question multiple times during the session. He was like, "How old are you? Do your knees hurt? How old are you? Do your knees hurt?" Now he's asking me this repeatedly because that's what he's used to at home. And he's anxious. It's a new environment. I'm a new person. He does not know how to talk to me, but he wants to connect with me. And he does not know what else to ask. Because he's like, okay, this lady, she's tall, she's big, and she looks like she's going to test me on something. So how do I connect with her? How do I engage with her, right? So most autistic kids are anxious in these social settings because they want to connect. And out of that anxiety comes all that so-called inappropriate language, which is intent, the intent is not to be inappropriate. Did I answer your question? I know it's a roundabout answer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think we also spoke about the attitudinal barriers already, that we may have attitudes that are not welcoming the autistic community, and that might become a barrier. And then we have organizational barriers. This happens at schools. This happens even within the family organization. There might be a dinner table, and the parents might have an expectation that everybody has to sit at the dinner table and eat a certain way without talking or without watching TV or without holding their cell phones, right? This might be an expectation. It can happen. It may not happen. Does your child get the nutrition that they need? If they get it, let go of those expectations. Don't set expectations that you're then going to shoot yourself on the foot because you're not going to win at the end. Your child's going to win. So just give it up, right? So that's what I tell parents, like, don't fight it too much. It's okay. If your child doesn't eat at the dinner table, he wants to run around and keep munching something and then come back and have mini snacks during the day instead of having a whole meal. That's all right. He's getting the nutrition that he needs. Whatever he's snacking on, make sure that's healthy. That you can draw a boundary on. But making him sit at a certain place and eat for 20 minutes straight, you're not going to win that thing. Don't try it. You're just going to lose miserably, right? Because there are sensory needs that are very different for autistic people. This lighting may be putting me off, right? Or I might have some noise in the room that really throws me off. I might have some kind of texture in the food that really bothers me. I might not want my different food items to touch each other, right? So there are all of these different, sensory needs around food that autistic children have. And as they grow into adults, they continue to have. It might change, but those things still exist. They don't disappear. So they continue to exist. And so I might not want to sit in a classroom because there's that whir sound coming from some kind of light from there. So I may want to put on noise canceling headphones in the class. That's not being offensive. That's just me helping myself so I can be in your class, so I can study and get through, right? So these are organizational barriers, whether it's a family environment or educational environment or work environment, the things that we can change. We have We have 3-hour classes sometimes at the university, and I always encourage the university people to not do that. Nobody can sit for 3 hours and listen. It's not humanly possible, right? So I tell them, break it into small chunks, like have 1 hour, 45-minute classes, have some activities, have some discussions. That doesn't happen. That accommodates all students, right? If we make that change for autistic students, that will help everyone. Because nobody, whether they're autistic or not, cannot sit for 3 hours and listen. So those kinds of organizational barriers we set up. And then we tell, oh, that's their problem. The problem is actually ours. If we fix it, those problems for that child will disappear. And then comes environmental barriers, which exist everywhere in our world. You go to a movie theater, you go to a mall, you sit inside a car, any place you go to, there are environmental barriers that autistic children face. And remember that autistic children or autistic adults like a certain routine. They want some kind of predictability. They want things to happen a certain way every single time. Change is hard for all of us, but it is harder for an autistic person. So approaching that change gradually is helpful. When you introduce a sudden change, it throws them. Yes.
Why is it hard?
Fantastic question. Because change brings anxiety. Because change tells you that I am not safe. That something's going to happen right now, and my whole world's going to fall apart. That's the extent of experience they're having. That's how they perceive change. Right? It's something that's just falling apart completely. It's like, oh my gosh, everything's just going to end. The same kid that I told you about, the one who asked me about my age, if you change the route that he takes to go to school, he cries through the entire time. And then he starts asking mom and dad, are you going to die? That is how extreme that anxiety is. So he believes that if you change the route and you change something, you think it's a very small modification. You have to change a route because there is some road work going on there. It's a very small thing for you. But then for that child, it's a very big deal. And then when he gets off the car, he asks his mom, he's like, when I come back home, are you going to still be there? Or are you not going to be there? Because that change is then communicating to him that, oh my gosh, maybe everything's going to change. Maybe my parents are going to go away. Maybe this house is not going to be there. Maybe my dog is not going to be there. So one change is telling them, it's like, if our child or, our spouse or someone doesn't not do something, we think, oh, forever, they're not going to do that much, we exaggerate that, right? Like we have those fears sometimes. So that's kind of the anxiety that they experience. So when you change, when that routine or that expectation, it's creating a lot of anxiety and a lot of lack of trust on the person who's, right now in charge of your life, which is usually your parents or your grandparents or someone who's your primary care provider, right? So it takes time. So I have, what I do is when I have clients, I tell them ahead of time, if I know that there's going to be a change. There are times that I don't know, right? And then I tell, I apologize. I said, I'm sorry, I didn't know this was going to happen. I didn't know the lights were going to go off, or I didn't know this fire alarm was going to go off at this time. It was totally unexpected. Can we move outside? Can we take a break? What would help you? Then I ask them to decide at that point of time. And if I know ahead of time that something's going to change, I tell them that this is coming, this change is happening, and let's prepare ourselves. We use what's called a social story. So a social story is the whole scene laid out in different scenes. This is what's going to happen. If this change happens, how do I shift my mind? Right? Seems like a lot of work for parents, for teachers. It's a lot of work. That's why we exist here as, to support.
I'm sorry, I have another question.
No, don't be sorry. No.
That's I'm wanting to be negative.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to bring out another side, try to understand the whole.
Yeah.
picture. When you have a person that requires a lot of explanation and things, is it too much to ask for everyone to change that environment for that one person? To a certain extent, absolutely. But how far do we go a society, when there's so many people that are changing, like you said, 1 out of 36, it's a lot.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's going to, I don't think it's going to slow down, it's going to exceed.
Yeah.
But how do we find those, what's acceptable for now to try to change things? Not have everybody have to change their routines in order to accommodate.
Yeah.
How do we find that balance? I think that's really what I'm trying to do.
Okay, so if I have to translate your, like rephrase your questions, I think what you're asking is how much can we go, how much can we all keep changing? Or the increasing number of autistic people who are changing, like what is the end? Like how much can we change really? You're asking that. So I'd say for that autistic person's immediate environment, like the immediate family or the teachers, you have to change a lot to support them, right? It's not, see, these are things that we do anyway for our children. So depending upon our child's personality, we make some modifications in our lives, right? Some modifications. But if you know that your child is disabled, you're going to make more modifications. Now, why parents push back is because autism is an invisible disability, right? If it was a physical disability, parents don't push back. They don't whine about them. I'm not saying you're whining, but I'm saying parents they don't whine about making those modifications for a child with a physical disability because they see that disability. Because autism is invisible. Oftentimes the behaviors of that child are seen as me not wanting to be compliant, me not wanting to be respectful, me being lazy, me just being difficult. You know, these are the interpretations that parents have. There is a book called The Uniquely Human. If you're interested, you know, we could do a workshop at some point that we could do like a book club or reading around that book. It's an amazing book. And that book talks about a chapter called Why. You know, you asked a fantastic question. Why is that expectation of lack of change, you know, why is that happening? So if we start asking why, we understand that, you know, if I make certain changes, then this child is happier. This child is able to do the things that we want him to do and the things that he wants to do as well. Right? So that's immediate for the immediate environment. Now let's go to the next part of your question, which is like, what can the world do, right? Now I approach it in two ways. One, if you think of it, autistic people, 75% of them, by the time they're 15 years old, want to commit suicide. By the time they're 15 years old, want to commit suicide. I have not put these things in the slide, but this is information I'm happy to go into, like basic research articles, all of that. This is extremely depressing. By the time they're 30, every autistic person has considered at least one time in their life, 100% of autistic people have considered at least one time in their life to kill themselves, right? So do we want them all to die is the question. If I was an autistic person here, that would be the exact question that I would ask you. Do you want me to die so you can have a more convenient life? Is what the autistic person would ask you. I have so many friends and collaborators who are autistic now, and every single day of their life is misery. Their colleagues, their co-workers don't understand them. Their partners, if they're married, don't understand them. Several of them don't sustain relationships. They, you know, quit. They don't quit, the partners leave them. And they're usually kicked out of work because the work environment doesn't understand them. So there are all of these. There are batteries. I'll go here and talk. Yeah. So there are lots of these issues about you know, what happens if we don't accommodate and we don't change? What happens to the life of that autistic person, right?
So this is just one aspect. If I have to go to the government office, I have a problem. If I have to go get my driver's license, I have a problem. If I have to do my groceries, I have a problem. Because nobody around me understands me. Right? If there is like, there are like 5 people in a grocery store and one person understands autism, that would make my life so much easier. Right? If I have to go somewhere, I need to buy a ticket. And if that person in that counter understands what autism is and they communicate to me in a respectful way, that would change my day. Right? So that's why we're doing all these education and these workshops. So if we can change our environments little by little, see, all we're asking for is a little bit of understanding. We're not saying come all the way. We're saying take one step towards. Just try to understand. It's like what the deaf community asked for. The deaf community is not telling you everybody learn American Sign Language, everybody communicate in American. That's not what the deaf community is saying. They're saying learn some basic signs, right? So if you learn some basic ASL signs, then it's going to work for you. It's going to work for me. That's all we're saying. Be okay with some basic accommodations. Like say, for example, the communication side is one basic thing that we can do in our environments. To approach everyone with a little bit of more empathy, instead of just dismissing someone off by saying, okay, that person's rude, that person's like a really bad person. Instead of saying that, saying, okay, let's approach them with empathy. We're saying, okay, can we say, okay, that, we don't know what would have gone on in that person's life. Maybe they're autistic. Can we approach them a little bit differently? So a little bit, yeah. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, to working with young children,
Yeah.
4 and 5 years old. And they have trouble, like you say, going into Walmart or a
Yeah.
big store,
Mhm.
noise.
Mm-hmm.
Would it be better to work with them and take them like to Audis? Walk around a smaller store and, smaller environment,
Mm-hmm.
because you can't keep them at home.
No. Yes.
So work with smaller outings.
Mhm.
Okay.
You can do that, or you can change the time of day that you take them for grocery shopping.
Yeah.
Don't go at the time where, like it's peak hour when everybody's there, like go maybe very early in the morning or, like midday or something like that, where there isn't a lot of crowd.
Right.
You could adjust the timing. You could also potentially, I've had one parent here in Bowling Green actually talk to the managers at Walmart to cancel the music when their child comes in. Because the music bothers them. And Walmart's have listened to it and do that. And Bowling Green is actually such a friendly place. And people do nice things like that. Where I used to live in Denver, and people don't care too much. So yeah, they're like to do whatever, so yeah, so those modifications are allowed. Also doing short increments of that shopping. Instead of getting your whole shopping list in one day, go multiple trips, buy 3 things today, 5 things tomorrow, things like that. So those kinds of short increments will make it helpful. Also making it fun and engaging, give the child some tasks.
Okay.
Like with my 2-year-old son, I tell him to hold the bag while I'm putting the apples inside. So every time we pick up one item from the grocery store aisle, he holds the bag and I put the item inside. And then when we go, where I tell him, okay, next in the list, we're buying coffee, go look for it. He'll look at something and he'll say it's coffee. I'm like, no, that's not coffee, that's bread. So let's find something else, right? So we go walk around and it becomes a task. It becomes like an activity for them. Okay, I spy, you wear some funny goggles or something, and then look for, okay, we're going to search for banana bread. And then you put those funny glasses and look for it to make it a fun activity. Then that becomes easier for some children.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just one more question. How about conversation? Because I'm the great grandmother, so I'm not seeing her on a tape.
Right.
So when I get together, it's hard to make.
Conversations
I
with them.
can,
Yeah.
and conversation. So can I just talk like, people are so happy to see you today, and
Yeah.
just kind of make a conversation that doesn't force him to try to answer.
Exactly. You said it.
So, have a conversation that where you don't have an expectation to respond, to have him respond a certain way. You have a conversation, just understand that he loves you. He may not communicate the way that your other grandchildren or your other great grandchildren communicate with you.
So
He may communicate a different way. That doesn't mean he doesn't like you.
I can hear you something to think about, like, man, I'm so glad to see you.
Yes,
I really like.
enjoy playing
I
with
was
you. Yeah,
Hoping that when I think about it, leave, give me a big hug. And let him think about
yeah. So this is when you said hug, it made me think about some of my autistic clients that I work with. We call it the one-way hug or the one-side hug. I tell him, okay, I'm gonna give you a one, I'm not hug you. I'm gonna give you a one-side hug. Okay, Chris doesn't hug me back, but this is a one-side hug. So that's totally allowed. That allows you to hug, but you're okay with him not hugging back, right? So that kind of thing is, I tell the child, you can tell Ethan, I want to give you a one-way hug. Are you okay with that? And then give a one-way hug.
Yeah.
That's totally good.
Okay.
Right? And then find out from parents what his interests are, like what are some topics or toys or characters, or they all love all these cartoon characters, right?
Mhm.
So there's something like that, maybe a sticker or a book about that character, something like that that you could talk about, that he feels like he wants to engage with you. There was a 15-year-old that I saw recently. She refused to talk to me the entire time. I was spending like 4 hours in their house. She refused to talk to me.
Mhm.
And then during the conversation, I said, I spoke at a podcast recently, and she immediately turned. And she was like, did you say you spoke at a podcast? And I said, yeah. She was like, I love podcasts. So she was like, okay, now this person's worth talking to because they like what I like. So autistic children all children want other people who like the things they like. We all want that. But then autistic children are more specific, right? So most of my research that I'm doing right now, we use video gaming in our studies because a lot of autistic, I'm not saying all autistic kids, but a lot of autistic kids like video gaming. So we use video gaming because that's where we meet them and where they are, because they then want to engage with us. So find something that taps into their interest and then use that. Yeah.
When a child is diagnosed that they're autistic, why is it that doctors right away want to put them on medication to, I don't know, calm them down or do something?
You can say no to it. You can say no to it. It is very hard. Most autistic.
You know, it goes both ways, and it should be.
You don't need medications really. You don't need medications unless you're having some kind of physiological problems, like you're not able to digest your food. Because see, along with autism comes a lot of gastrointestinal issues. So a lot of autistic kids have tummy aches, they cry a lot, sometimes they're not able to communicate that they have that. So in situations like that, you can tell the family has the ability to tell the doctor, I don't want it. I don't want this medication, or reduce the dosage. In most situations, the parents are the one who requests those medications. The doctor doesn't decide that the child needs the medication. The doctor asks you, do you need this? The doctor never tells you or never tells the parents that the child needs to be on the medication. The parents are the ones that are asking for the medication because they want some extra, whatever. They want their life to be a little more convenient, right? See, most of these behaviors that we're seeing in autistic children, parents are seeing that, or grandparents, whoever, our non-autistic community is seeing that as an inconvenience. I always ask parents, if the child is flapping their hands constantly in a social gathering, they're constantly doing this, or they're rocking their body up and down, or they're doing this, they're doing things like that. I ask parents, why do you want to fix that? Ask yourself why you want to fix that. The reason, in most situations, the reason you want to fix these things is because you feel embarrassed, because you feel odd, because it is an inconvenience for you. It's like saying, I like to wear a cotton shirt, and you make me put on like a really thick woolen sweater in a hot summer day, and then you tell me that's the social appropriate thing to do. Aren't you making my life miserable? Right? So parents, we
sometimes think that, and I'm not saying all parents of autistic children are bad people. I'm just saying that we have to set our priorities right. Like, what is our priority? Do we want our child to be happy and calm and relaxed, or do we want this child to feel miserable? Right? In some situations, parents will defend it by saying, well, you know, if I give that medication, the child's going to sleep better. Or if I give that medication, the child's going to, you know, attend better. The problem with that is you're going to keep increasing the dosage. And with time, the child's just going to become like really dull and not wanting to do anything. There is really no medication for autism. There are medications to regulate sleep. We all know that. There are medications to sleep better. There is no medication for anxiety in this whole world. All the medications that are prescribed for anxiety are only helping you control or regulate some very superficial symptoms. That's about it. They're not helping you go get rid of that anxiety at all. With time, you just keep increasing your dosage to anxiety, and then you switch to some other drug which you don't want to take. Yeah, substance abuse.
When the behavior becomes violent.
See, those things, yes, please, thank you for bringing that up. I was just going to say that. With only behaviors that you try to address, regulate, are behaviors that either harm the child themselves or harm other people. If there are any other behaviors that are not harming the child or harming other people, don't try to control or regulate those behaviors. Those are part of that child. You don't have to regulate them. You don't have to do anything about it. I think she had a question and then I'll come to you.
Oh, I'm just going to wait.
You're going to wait.
I'm wondering, is there any understanding of why the incredible increase in autism over the last 50 years?
Oh, that's 50 years? Actually, the increase has come only since 2013. So the main reason is increased awareness. There are so many people around us who may have been autistic that we didn't even know were autistic. They themselves wouldn't have known they're autistic. So main reason is increased awareness. The diagnostic criteria for autism has become widened. So so now we're catching more people. So because of the expanded diagnostic criteria. So that's the second reason. The third reason, there's more funding, research funding and medical funding, health insurance. All of these companies are spending money on autism. So there are a lot of people, even when they don't have a child on the autism spectrum, they go ask for an autism diagnosis from the people like me who are diagnosing. I've had so many parents come to me and say, can you give my child an autism diagnosis? And I'm like, your child is not autistic. Why should I give an autism diagnosis? And they'll be like, that's only when school will give me speech and language therapy services. Only then the school will, the health insurance will pay for those services. If you tell the child is having a speech and language challenge, nobody's going to pay for those services. So you need an autism diagnosis to get that extra service. The health insurance will put money into it. The research will put money into it. The company, or there are waivers and scholarships that are specifically available in the state of Ohio. Every state has special waivers and scholarship for children who are autistic. So therefore, parents will be like, I need that waiver. That waiver will get me extra rest. I can take off one day and go watch a movie with my partner if I can get that respite, right? So I can do these things if I get that autism diagnosis for my child. See, this is all because if you start digging deeper and deeper and deeper into all of these problems, it comes back to the need for a highly individualistic society that does not belong, that does not believe in a sense of community, right? I love what you all have here, a sense of community. When I'm your age, pretty sure I'm not going to have that. I have to build it. I'm not going to have that. That sense of community is gone. The sense of community exists in online spaces these days. That is truly not a sense of community. That's just like very, you know, you can be happy thinking, oh, I have 500 friends on Facebook. Are you really? No, you don't have friends on Facebook. Nobody cares about you. So these are things that you parents do these things. See, I cannot blame parents and grandparents and all these people because We do this because we don't have support system here. And imagine people like me, immigrants. If you come from a different country, your family, your parents live 20,000 miles away across 2 oceans. How on earth are you going to bring them here to take care of your autistic child? They don't even understand autism. So I have to go through a whole lecture, getting them to understand it, and then change their cultural expectations around it, and then tell them, now you need to come and babysit my son. No, they're not going to do that. It's a huge problem. We've lost our sense of community. And that's why through this, we're trying to see, can we make this all a community affair? Can we take the awareness of this understanding of autistic people as a need for the community to understand, and not just the family of that autistic child? I've done so many workshops in parks, in people who run parks, people who run public libraries. Every single public library in Colorado, I've spoken to, and I have done workshops with them. There have been libraries who have taken this as an agenda and modified their library to get more autistic kids to their libraries. So we can make these things happen by that small change that we make in our individual environments. Is there a comment or something? No. Okay. Can we go move?
Yeah.
I think I might not finish my slides. That's okay. That's okay. That always you can change. Go ahead. I'll just probably leave you with this concept, the neurodiversity itself, which is what I came here to talk about. So neurodiversity itself, we'll all try to understand what that means. It's like biodiversity, right? There's so many plants and animals and flora and fauna in this world. Can you say one's lesser and one's awesome and one's kind of bad? No, right? We need that biodiversity. We need a willow tree, and we need an oak tree, and we need a coconut tree, and a palm tree, and a banyan tree, and everything is valid, right? So just like that, neurodiversity means that each of our brains are different. The whole human race is neurodiverse. But the person who's neurodivergent is a person who behaves and learns and socializes and communicates in a way that's different from the expected norm. You can go to the next. That's different from the expected norm of what is neurodivergent, of what is majority, or what people consider as so-called normal. There is no normal brain. All our brains work differently, right? So all of us are neurodiverse. Every single person in this room is neurodiverse. But I may be neurodivergent, or I may be multiply neurodivergent. I may have ADHD and autism and OCD, or I may be autistic and I may have anxiety disorder. So then I am a multiply neurodivergent person because I think and process the world and communicate and socialize in ways that are different from the majority of the people. And that's what we need to understand is what neurodivergent means. Proceed to the next slide. So I think I want to move to the very end. So we can keep going. I think I spoke about all of this in some ways. You can keep going. Yeah, keep going. Go to the very end. I think what might be helpful is I'll leave it to you all. Really decide what you think might be helpful, and we'll that is one that I want to spend on. Thank you. So this is some language that I think might be helpful for you all to take on. I'll share slides with Daniel, so you can get a copy of these slides. So these are some words that we are used to using towards autistic people or other neurodivergent people. Saying, for example, fidgety, lazy, irritable, rude, rigid, inauthentic, weird, awkward. We say all of the odd. We say all these things. How can we modify that to helpful language that we use when we're talking about autistic people? Obviously, this is not a rule. So if you miss one, don't worry about it. Don't think, oh my gosh, I used, disrespectful. Don't worry about it. These are not rules. These are just suggestions. When we start using more respectful words, when we talk about autistic people, people around us listen and pay attention, and they think, about it, and they, want to modify that as well. So that's what we're trying to do there, right? So I think we're close to 12:30. I'll take a couple more questions and we can stop. Do you want to wait still?
Yeah.
Okay, you have a question.
Is one gender more apt to have autism than another?
That's a 3-hour lecture,
Oh.
but I'll tell you a quick answer. Currently, there are more number of boys who are diagnosed as autistic than there are girls. So the ratio is 1 girl is to 4 boys. So boys are more likely to get diagnosed with autism than girls are. And that does not mean that there are lesser autistic girls. What that means is that the behaviors or autistic features are more prominent in boys, or they're easy to identify in boys. They are less easy or harder to identify in girls because girls engage in what is called masking. Masking is the attribute where girls by nature want or have a tendency to want to fit in the social norm. They want to be liked more so than boys want. This starts even as young as 8 years of age. We know that masking starts emerging as young as 8 years of age. When girls start behaving like their peer girls, they start playing with dolls and, wearing pink and doing all the other things that other girls want to do because they want to fit in, they want to be liked. Boys don't care so much. When they are 15 and 16, they notice, and then maybe they want to change at that time. So autism is more prominent or more easily identified in boys than it is for girls, and that's the reason. Yes.
You work with personnel at Bittersweet Farms,
Yeah, when I was a student, we did a project with Bittersweet Farms. Do you know Temple Grandin, the autistic lady? She used to work at Colorado State University. She was the very first openly autistic person. There was a movie about her too. So she had invited me and my professor once to Bittersweet Farms, and we had worked with them at one point, but not now, like not recently.
Is there a certain age where you notice the autism more than?
So autism can be diagnosed reliably between age 3 to 4. But you can start, so for trained people like myself, you can start noticing features as young as 6 months of age.
Wow.
Yeah.
I have one.
Yeah, you can identify around by the time the child is 10 months old. Like I can tell, obviously I cannot tell the parents your child is autistic when the child is 10 months old. So what I do is I tell parents that let's start speech and language therapy and let's start doing some early intervention. Ohio has a program called Help Me Grow. So let's start doing that. Let's start giving more language stimulation and support for that child. So by the time the child is 3 years old, we've established some modality of communication for that child. Because a child might experience speech and language delays. So if you start therapy earlier, then you can provide access to a communication system earlier than waiting until the child is 5. So I encourage parents to start therapy.
So a question for the agent.
Yeah.
Why do autistic children often like toy trains?
Yeah, because they give a sense of predictability. Yeah. So toy trains, you can ask specific autistic people, but not all autistic children enjoy toy trains, but most of them do. And I think everything about toy trains, right? Like I love toy trains too. So I think everything about trains, this is how one of my clients has described his interest in trains. He actually knows the history of trains, the locomotive engines, and he knows all the data about, he just like reads about trains a lot. He's now, I think 14 or 15 maybe, but he's always been interested in trains. There are some other things he's interested in too, but trains, especially steam trains that, the locomotive engines, that is his special interest. And he tells me that trains make him feel calm.
the repetitive sound of the moving train calms him down. Like, because he's so, like, when he's very feeling very anxious and he's sitting down and watching the thing go round and round and round, and there's this repetitive rhythmic sound that goes with it, it's very calming for him. And he said, think of it as if you go watch, and he said, my mom really likes looking at the beach. So is that something that you enjoy? I said, yeah, I love the beach too. So when I look at the beach, it's very calming for me. And I can just sit there and keep looking at the ocean and the waves and the sound of it and all of that, right? So that's what it does to him. It's very calming for him. And he describes this as so many different things that autistic children do, and they do it repetitively because it's very calming for them. Yeah. Did you have something?
How do we're talking about gastric problems?
Yeah.
It's that trigger that's saying there's a lot of tension or anxiety, or is it a physical condition?
Oh, that's a great question. It can go both ways. So a lot of autistic children experience gastrointestinal issues. Because of that, we need to understand what their, what their GI system needs, what their gastrointestinal system needs. So I encourage a lot of parents to take their children to a specialist who's a gastroenterologist and not to the regular PCP, because that person will then tell you if the child needs modified diet or any kind of additional supports. So it goes both ways. Because the gastrointestinal issues are more, the child is feeling more restless. When the anxiety increases, the gastrointestinal problems increase. So it's like a chicken and egg thing, right? So if you can understand what diet really calms your child down and helps them, and that is just trial and error.
Because
You just have to try different things.
they're really a problem because
Yeah.
they're, vomiting a lot.
Yeah,
Then you're bringing up all the stomach fluid
yes.
that's part of your esophagus.